Everyone in the city of Valdrin knew the name Garin Vale. They knew it the way you know a landmark, something old, something fixed, something you stopped actually seeing years ago. For 60 years, the old man had worked the stones of Iron Hollow Spire with his own hands. Not a guild-sponsored project, not a legacy commission. Just one man and 60 years of obsessive, quiet, unremarkable labor, pouring everything he had into a personal tower that no system could fully classify and no examiner could properly rank. The Tower Authority had tried. Their assessors came back pale and said the readings were inconsistent. Garin just smiled and thanked them for their time. He had one student, his grandson Ren. Ren, who failed his awakening exam at 16. Ren, whose system status read, class none, rank unregistered. The boy the examiners called a statistical outlier, which was a polite way of saying broken. Garin had shrugged at the results and gone back to work. He kept teaching the boy anyway, footwork, angles, the way force travels, nothing that showed up on a registry, nothing the Sovereign Guild cared about. The Sovereign Guild cared about one thing, Iron Hollow. They had wanted the tower for 11 years. Garin had refused 11 times. On the 12th, they didn't ask. The day Garin filed his retirement papers, the guild filed a licensing dispute, an obscure clause about unregistered tower structures operating inside city limits. Garin's legal representation took one look at the paperwork and went quiet. The clause existed. The clause had been inserted 14 months ago, backdated, and no one in the authority had caught it or wanted to. Garin signed the transfer on a Tuesday. He died on Friday. 3 days. That was all it took. The old man sat in the house he had lived in for 40 years, and something in him simply let go. Ren was at the funeral when Orvac Crane showed up. The guild master came with 4 of his senior lieutenants, and the easy stride of a man attending a property inspection, not a burial. He wore the Sovereign Guild's silver sash. He stood at the edge of the gathered mourners and waited until the ceremony reached its quiet middle, and then he said, loud enough for 2 rows to hear, "The boy's here. The one they say the old man wasted 30 years on." He looked at Ren with something that wasn't contempt, because contempt implies the other person matters. "Dead end," he said, "the whole line." Nobody moved, nobody said a word. Ren stood at the graveside with his hands at his sides and said nothing back. That was the moment the mark appeared. It started at his left wrist and climbed a brand that burned white-hot for exactly 3 seconds before settling to something like warmth. Ren looked down at it. The shape was complex, layered, the kind of thing that would take a system an hour to render. It wasn't a system notification. It wasn't a class awakening. It was something older. A line appeared at the bottom of his vision, clean and unhurried. Inheritor's brand activated. 60 years compressed. Unlock begins at floor 1. Garin Vale, architect. Ren Vale, heir. The count beneath it read, floors reclaimed 0/60. Ren looked at the tower in the distance. Its lights had been off since Tuesday. He turned back to the grave and finished saying goodbye to his grandfather. There would be time for everything else. He walked into Iron Hollow the next morning. The Sovereign Guild had posted a pair of C-rank guild members at the entrance, a formality, since no one was supposed to be entering a disputed tower, and certainly not a boy with no class registration. The 2 guards barely looked up before Ren moved past them. Not through them, not around them, past them in the specific way that takes an opponent's position and simply makes it irrelevant. They were on the ground before either of them understood what had happened. Brand Layer 1 unlocked. Garin Vale, age 1924. Foundation Series, Displacement, Entry Angle, Contact Economy. 5 years of movement principles compressed. Floor 1 opened. It was a stone corridor that Garin had built himself, every joint set by hand. The walls had markings on them, not decorations, Ren realized. Notations. His grandfather had been writing his work on the walls of the place the whole time. 60 years of discoveries, cataloged in a private language made of geometry and force vectors. The brand read it in seconds. Ren felt his body adjust the way a machine adjusts after calibration, small, precise, irreversible. He kept moving. By floor 5, the guild had sent replacements. 4 B-ranks this time, wearing full activation gear and carrying the guild's registered weapons. By the time the report reached Orvac Crane's desk, the message was short. All 4 incapacitated, no injuries on the intruder, unable to determine method. Orvac read it twice. "The Vale boy," his senior lieutenant said. "The unregistered one." Orvac was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Send Sale, tell him not to hurry." Sale Morn was 22 years old and the Sovereign Guild's ranked prodigy, a class at 19, the youngest rated combatant in Valdrin's licensed history. He had 17 documented wins over registered B ranks and 2 documented wins over S-class opponents in controlled assessments. He was also the person who had, at Ren's awakening exam 3 years ago, stood in the examination hall and said the words, "He doesn't just have no class, he's dragging the average down by existing." He arrived at Iron Hello on a Thursday afternoon and walked in like he owned it, because as far as the licensing board was concerned, he was entering guild property. He found Ren on floor 44. Bran Layer 44 unlocked. Garen Vale, age 63-64. Convergence series, the single-point theorem. All force paths reduced to 1 point. 1 point is enough for anything. The floor was a wide open chamber, lit amber from the stones themselves. Sale came in at full activation. His registered class ability, Shatter Stance, put a visible shimmer around his frame, an A-rank combat buffer that had absorbed everything Valdrin's licensed fighters had thrown at it for 3 years. He looked at Ren across the chamber and smiled the way someone smiles when the outcome is settled, and the fun is just seeing how fast. "You're not ranked," Sale said. "You know that, right? I can't even officially count this as a win because you're not in any system." A pause. "Your grandfather built something impressive up here. I'll give him that. Too bad the paperwork was never clean." Ren said nothing. He crossed the chamber in 6 steps, and on the 7th he stopped, and on the 7th Sale's Shatter Stance was in pieces on the floor. Not broken through, not overwhelmed. Reduced to 1 point and passed. Sale hit the far wall and stayed there, the combat buffer completely nullified. His class ability stripped down to its component assumption and found wanting. He sat against the stone and breathed and stared at the young man standing in the center of the chamber like he had not moved at all. "The paperwork," Ren said quietly, "was never clean because Orvac wrote it that way." He went back to the stairs. Bran Layer 45, unlocked. By floor 50, the word had spread. Valdrin's Tower District had a feed, licensed fighters, assessors, registered observers with documentation rights. Someone had started logging Ren's progress the day before, first as a curiosity, then as something they didn't have a word for. The feed was pulling more viewers than any sanctioned guild event in 3 years. The Sovereign Guild issued a formal statement calling the incursion an unauthorized breach of licensed property and requesting Tower Authority intervention. The Tower Authority sent an assessor to evaluate. The assessor climbed to floor 38, observed the state of the brand markings on the walls and filed a report that said, "Classification pending. Further assessment required." The assessor then went home and did not return calls. Orvac Crane held a press event at the guild hall. He stood at the podium and said, with the measured calm of a man who has spent 30 years making people believe things, that the Vale Estates transfer had been fully legal, that the boy's grief had led him to reckless action, and that no responsible authority in the city should treat an unregistered, unclassed intruder as a legitimate claimant. From floor 53, someone in the feed typed, "He's on 53 now." The press event ended early. Ren reached floor 59 on a Saturday evening. The feed had 10,000 observers. Brand Layer 59 unlocked. Garen Vale, age 78. Final Series Part 1, the structure underneath. Every system is built on assumptions. Find the assumptions. The structure underneath is where you stand. He stood on floor 59 and looked at the staircase that led up. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and took out the documents his grandfather had left him, not in a vault, not locked behind anything. Tucked in the back of a notebook sitting on Garen's workbench, dated 6 months ago, as though the old man had known this was coming and decided to simply wait. The notebook said, in Garen's narrow handwriting, for when they finally do it. I'm sorry I couldn't keep the fight from landing on you. I don't think you'll mind. The documents were Garen's copies of the original licensing dispute, including the version that predated the guild's filing, with the backdated clause flagged in red pen, and 3 signatures from Tower Authority clerks who had been paid to process it without review. The chain of custody was complete. 3 people's names, 2 institutional stamps, 1 falsified date. Ren put the documents back in his coat and climbed the last staircase. Floor 60. Garen had built this room as the capstone of everything. It was not a combat floor. It had no traps, no trials, no formal mechanism. It was a large circular room at the top of the spire, open to the sky through a glass ceiling, with the whole of Valdren spread out below. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in Garen's notation, 60 years of it, dense and precise and lit by the amber glow of the stones. In the center of the room was a single stone chair, the kind of thing you put somewhere when you intend to sit and think for a long time. Brand Layer 60 unlocked. Garen Vale, age 79. Final series complete. You have everything I found enough. The rest is yours. Class designation unclassified, the inheritor. Tower Authority assessment above system. Rank not applicable. Status active. Ren sat in the chair. He stayed there for an hour. Then he opened the feed on his registry device. It was still running, somehow even up here, and he uploaded Garen's documents directly to the Tower Authority's public record portal. No announcement, no statement, just the files time-stamped with the flagged clause and the 3 names and the 2 institutional stamps. The authority had an automated alert system for submissions flagged as misconduct. It fired at 9:14 p.m. By 9:45, the 3 clerks had been suspended pending review. By 10:20, the Tower Authority had issued an emergency freeze on all Sovereign Guild licensing operations, pending an investigation into the backdated clause. At 11:03 p.m., Orvac Crane arrived at the Iron Hello entrance with 2 lawyers and a prepared statement, and found Ren coming down the stairs from the inside. They stood in the entrance hall and looked at each other. Orvac's lawyers were already calculating. The freeze meant the Guild's 11 active tower contracts were in jeopardy. The 11 contracts meant the Guild's operating revenue. The operating revenue meant everything. Orvac had built his empire on licensed control of other people's structures. Without the licenses, there was no empire, just a man in a silver sash. There is room, Orvac said carefully, for a settlement. Ren looked at him for a long moment. Floor 60, Ren said. He built it open to the sky. He used to say the whole city was visible from up there. He wanted to be able to see everything he'd spent his life working inside of. Ren looked past Orvac at the entrance door at the night outside. He never once asked for anything back. He just kept building. A pause. I'm not settling. Orvac's lawyers began to speak. Ren walked out. The Tower Authority's final ruling came 8 days later. The backdated clause was struck. The transfer was voided. Iron Hello Spire reverted to the Vale estate in full. The Sovereign Guild's master license was suspended for 1 year pending a broader audit. 2 of the 11 active tower contracts were reassigned to other operators. The other 9 were under review. Orvac Crane stepped down from the Guild mastership on the advice of his lawyers and was not heard from publicly again. Sale Morn filed a formal request for a ranked assessment against Ren 6 weeks later. The Tower Authority forwarded the request to the New Vale Tower Classification Office. The classification office sent back a single line: rank not applicable, assessment not meaningful at this time. Ren spent 3 days repairing the entrance hall. On the 4th day, he climbed back to the workbench on floor 3 where Garen had kept his tools, and he picked up the old man's chisel, and he went to the stone panel by the entrance where the tower's operator name was mounted. The panel that the guild had changed to read Sovereign Guild Holding, IRONHALLOW, was still there. He removed it cleanly. He put up the original one, which Garen had kept in a crate beneath the workbench, wrapped in cloth, still intact. IRONHALLOW Spire, VAEL. The feed was still running, 20,000 observers. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then the comments started coming in, not hype. Not numbers, not rankings, just people typing the old man's name, over and over: Garen Vale, Garen Vale, Garen Vale. Ren stood in front of the nameplate and looked at it. He did not cry. His grandfather had spent 60 years putting everything he had into this place so that one day, if the worst happened, there would be enough to answer it. There had been enough. Ren put the chisel back on the workbench, turned off the feed, and went to make dinner in the room on floor 2 that still smelled like old stone and lamp oil and 60 years of quiet, undefeated work.